Hello everyone! Today's book is called Library Lion, and I know I say this every day, but this really is one of my favourites. I have this book for years, and every time I read it, it gives me happy tears towards the end. Happy tears, what a little girl once called them, when you're happy but there are tears in your eyes. It's written by Michelle Knudsen, and the illustrations are by Kevin Hawkes. Now the library in this book might not be like the library that you visit. There are no computers, security, but let's see. The end pages, we've got a little picture, and I wonder where the lion is going to. One day, a lion came to the library. He walked right past the front desk and he disappeared between the bookshelves. Look at everyone's faces now, you know this is actually Mr. McBee. Mr. McBee ran down the hall to the head librarian's office. Miss Merriweather! No running, said Miss Merriweather without looking up. But there's a lion in the library, said Mr. McBee. Is he breaking any rules? Asked Miss Merriweather. She was very particular about rule breaking. Well, no, not really. Then leave him be. The lion wandered around the library. He sniffed the card index. He rubbed his head against the new book collection. And then he padded over to the story corner and he went to sleep. No one knew what to do. There weren't any rules about lions in the library. It was soon story time. There weren't any rules about lions at story time either. The story lady seemed a little nervous, but she read out the title of the first book in a strong, clear voice. The lion looked up. The story lady kept on reading. The lion stayed for the next story and the story after that. He waited for another, but the children began to walk away. Story time is over, a little girl told him. The lion looked at the children. He looked at the story lady. He looked at the closed books. And then he roared very loudly. Roar! Well, Miss Merriweather came marching out of her office. Who is making that noise? She demanded. It's the lion, said Mr. McBee. Miss Merriweather marched over to the lion. If you can't be quiet, then you'll have to leave. Those are the rules. The lion kept roaring. Roar, roar. He sounded sad. The little girl tugged on Miss Merriweather's dress. If he promises to be quiet, can he come back for story time tomorrow? The lion stopped roaring. He looked at Miss Merriweather. Miss Merriweather looked back. Then she said, yes, a nice quiet lion would certainly be allowed to come back for story time tomorrow. Hooray! Shouted the children. The next day the lion came back. You're early, said Miss Merriweather. Story time isn't until 3 o'clock. The lion didn't move. Very well, said Miss Merriweather. You might as well make yourself useful. So she sent him off to dust the encyclopedias until story time. He's dusting them with his tail. You might know what an encyclopedia is. Encyclopedias are books that have lots of information about everything, just like Google now. The next day, the lion arrived early. Again, This time Miss Merriweather asked him to lick the envelopes for the overdue notes. He looks quite happy, doesn't he? Soon the lion started doing jobs without even being asked. He dusted the encyclopedias, he licked the envelopes, he let small children stand on his back to reach the books on the highest shelves. Then he curled up in the story corner to wait for story time to begin. At first, the people in the library were very nervous about the lion, but soon they were used to having him there. In fact, he seemed very well suited to the lion because his big feet were quiet on the library floor. He made a comfy backrest for the children at story time, and he never roared in the library anymore. "Oh, what a helpful lion," the people said. They patted his soft head as he walked by. How did we ever get on without him? Mr. McBee scowled when he heard that. They had always managed fine before. No lions were needed. Lions, he thought, do not or could not understand rules. They did not belong in the library. I don't think Mr. McBee likes the lion. Is he a little bit jealous of him? One day, after he had dusted all the encyclopedias, he'd licked all the envelopes and helped up all the small children, the lion padded down the hall to Miss Merriweather's office to see was there anything else that he could do. There was still a while until story time. "Hello, Lion," said Miss Merriweather. "I have something you can do. You can take a book back to the front desk for me. Let me just get it down from this shelf." She stepped up onto the stool and the book was just out of her reach. She stood on her toes. She stretched her fingers, almost there. Then she stretched a little bit too far. Look what happened to her. And that's all you see. "Ouch," she said softly. She did not get up. "Mr. McBee," she called after a minute. "Mr. McBee." But Mr. McBee was at the front desk and he could not hear her calling. "Lion, please go and get Mr. McBee." Well, the lion ran down the hall. "No running," Miss Merriweather called after him. The lion put his big paws on the front desk and he looked at Mr. McBee. "Go away, Lion, I'm busy." The lion whined. He pointed his nose down the hall towards Miss Merriweather's office. Mr. McBee ignored him. Finally, the lion did the only thing he could think of to do. He looked Mr. McBee straight in the eye. Then he opened his mouth very wide, and he roared the loudest roar he had ever roared in his life. Roar! Oh, so loud that Mr. McBee's glasses came off. Mr. McBee gasped, "Oh, you're not being quiet. You're breaking the rules." So Mr. McBee walked down the hall as fast as he could. The lion did not follow him. He had broken the rules, and he knew what that meant. He hung his head and he walked towards the door. Mr. McBee didn't even notice. "Miss Merriweather, Miss Merriweather, the lion has broken the rules. The lion has broken the rules." He burst into Miss Merriweather's office. She wasn't in her chair. "Miss Merriweather." "Sometimes, Mr. McBee, there is a good reason to break the rules, even in the library. Now please go and call a doctor. I think I've broken my arm." Mr. McBee ran to call a doctor. And guess what Miss Merriweather called after him? "No running." The next day, things were back to normal. Miss Merriweather's left arm was in a sling. and the doctor had told her not to work too hard. She didn't worry. She said, I will have my lion to help me. But the lion didn't come to the library that morning. At 3 o'clock, she walked over to the story corner. The story lady was just starting to read. The lion was not there. People in the library kept looking up from their books and computers, hoping that they would see a familiar furry face. But the lion didn't come that day. He didn't come the next day or the day after that. The only one who looks happy is Mr. McBee. One evening, Mr. McBee stopped at Miss Merryweather's office as he was leaving. Can I do anything for you before I go, Miss Merryweather? No, thank you, she said. She was looking out of the window. Her voice was very quiet, even for the library. Mr. McBee frowned as he walked away. He thought there probably was something that he could do for Miss Merryweather. Can you guess? Well, Mr. McBee left the library, but he didn't go home. He walked around the nearby streets. He looked under cars. He looked behind bushes. He looked in back gardens and rubbish bins, and he looked up trees. Finally, he ended up back at the library. The lion was sitting outside, looking through the glass doors. Hello, lion, said Mr. McBee. The lion did not turn around. I thought you might like to know that there's a new rule in the library. No roaring aloud unless you have a very good reason. Say if you're trying to help a friend who's been hurt, for example. The lion's ears twitched. He turned around, but Mr. McBee was already walking away. The next day, Mr. McBee walked down the hall to Miss Merryweather's office. What is it, Mr. McBee? Said Mrs. Merryweather in her new sad, quiet voice. I thought you might like to know that there's a lion in the library. Miss Merryweather jumped up from her chair and she ran down the hall. Mr. McBee smiled and guess what he said? No running. Miss Merryweather didn't listen. Sometimes there was a good reason to break the rules, even in the library. And this is always the page that I get my happy tears. And we have the end. And there's the library. And look what's outside the library. 2 statues of lions. And that is the end. I hope you like this storybook as much as I do. Bye.